All right, it's 2 o'clock Eastern, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. I'm Matt Zeman with EO Raleigh Durham. I'm the learning chair up here. Welcome to our 6th virtual learning event from our series that we're calling Coronavirus and Your Business. We have an awesome session for you today and some good sessions coming up each Thursday at 2 o'clock in the coming weeks. Just before we get started, Amy Henning, who's our chapter manager, has been awesome putting these together and working with Olivia at EO Global. Thank you for helping get the word out. It's amazing to see people joining from all reaches of the world. I see on today's call, we have people from Johannesburg and London, looks like Israel. Let me see here. And then a bunch from the States, Atlanta, Minnesota, Charlotte, Birmingham, South Florida, San Francisco, Arizona, and so on. So that's awesome. Thank you for joining. We'd like this to be as what started out as a way to kind of connect our chapter in light of us canceling all of our in-person events has turned out to have a lot more interest. And we'd like today to be as interactive as possible. So right now everybody is muted, but we are going to open up the conversation at the end of this, and in classic EO style, please feel free to share a question from your own experience, and more on that just in a second. I'm going to put my email and Todd Atlas's email in the chat panel, and if you have any suggestions for future topics, you can put that there. Please send them to us by those emails, excuse me. Before we get going, there are 3 events coming up. Next Thursday at 2 o'clock, we have Dr. Tina LePage talking about critical stress management skills for leaders during this crisis. And she's going to give specific advice on how to manage your own stress and help your employees and your family manage their stress during this incredibly stressful time. The following Thursday, we have how we will science our way out of this pandemic. Dr. Giles Shea is going to host a panel of experts to explore what we know so far about COVID from a medical and science perspective and cover simple and practical ways to protect yourself. So it's one thing to watch doctors talk on TV and it's a one-way conversation. Here, we're going to have them in a panel and you can ask questions yourself to them. And then finally, on the 30th of April, again at 2 o'clock, how to increase your bottom line during tumultuous times and emerge even stronger. This is Culture Index. Brian Smith from Culture Index is going to discuss how to utilize applied behavioral analytics to identify and measure employee capability and productivity. With all that said, today's topic is scaling down. And today we have Paul Levering with BlueHat Mechanical, Dan Moore with Vaporware, and Matthew Cook with Davis Moore Advisors, 3 long-term EO members up here in Raleigh-Durham who are going to talk about their experiences. And again, just on the chat panel, that's where you can chat with us. The Q&A panel, ask questions, give thumbs up if you like a question and we know to make sure it's asked, and then feel free to use the raise your hand button if there is something that you would like to be called upon to answer yourself. All that being said, I think Paul Levering is going to kick this off and talk about BlueHat's experience, and then we'll go to Dan Moore and then to Matthew.
Cool, thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. So I consolidated this down into about 3 steps, excuse me, that we took. So if you go on to the first slide, this is just an experience share to lay out. You go, yeah. So experience share of what we did, how we responded, just to give a little background. BlueHat Mechanical, we are we maintain, repair, and replace commercial HVAC and refrigeration systems. So it's important to mention that we're 100% commercial. I know a lot of residential folks are doing well. People are still having technicians come to their homes. We are entirely focused on commercial, so we're affected by restaurants closing, offices closing, things like that. The second important point is that we're using EOS tools to run the business. So I'll use some EOS terminology, explain it in general terms, but I did want to at least, give a nod to EOS and how those tools are helping us respond to this. So you go to the next slide. So the first step, we established a short-term vision, right? It's the foundation for our decisions. Usually we're working with a BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal, and 10-year planning, and we keep that in mind, and a 3-year picture and a 1-year goals. All these timeframes have been compressed. right? So the vision right now, and to keep everybody on the same page with that vision, we said, number one, our vision is to survive, right? The business must survive. We drew a line in the sand and said that we want to be at least break even. Number two, we want to emerge from this stronger. And I heard somebody say one time, we want to cut the fat and not the muscle or the bone if we can help it. The third point, stay true to our core values. So sometimes when things get in crisis and emotions rise, you can forget your core values. So it's important not to forget core values. And core focus is supposed to keep you focused on what you love doing and what you're great at, which is a little different sometimes from a startup, which, you know, you're looking for sources of revenue, you're looking for any opportunity to get cash flow. So, you know, we're opening ourselves up to be able to think outside the box a little bit. But I can't tell I can't use the R word, residential word, with any of my technicians because we'd lose them, right? So we're really focused on commercial service. You can go to the next slide. So the second step here, we're going to estimate the business impact and plan our responses. And the reason we wanted to do that, we came up with best case, middle case, and worst case. And we wanted our responses in the future when these happened, to be unemotional. Right, so we want to think through it clearly first. Just like you might make investment decisions, you try to make those unemotionally. We're trying to make these business decisions unemotionally. So best case, middle case, worst case. The main differences between these is that is staffing. So we chose, we were going to act on a middle case assumption that our budget would be down 30% in revenues. The actions we take to pause lease payments. We worked with Nissan and Ally Bank. And they basically just gave us 2 or 3 months pause right out of the gate, which was awesome. We applied for the EIDL and the PPP, the 2 SBA loans that are available. We haven't actually applied for either one yet. We're in line. The EIDL I did do online, but the PPP, we're on the waiting list at 3 different places, and whoever takes us first, we're going to go. Wells Fargo is our primary bank, and they're not ready. So we did take overhead staff, take a temporary 25% pay cut, and our staff is really great. They actually offered to take a pay cut. So we went right there. And where scaling down comes from, if we do get budget minus 50%, the additional change we're going to make is we're going to have to furlough or temporarily lay off 2 staff members. And that's where the scaling down reference comes from. And if you go to the next slide, there's a tool in EOS called the accountability chart. The accountability chart is functions and roles, and it shows who's accountable to who for what. And very specifically, there are 2 positions on this accountability chart and where that we would cut. And the term reverse accountability chart, when you have accountability chart and it's very clear what the function is and what the roles are, you can just pick up those roles and somebody's got to do them, so you can just drop them on somebody else. So that's where having this accountability chart and being really clear is really valuable. So you can go to the next slide. So the third step here, measure, communicate, and respond. So all these timeframes are compressed. First of all, for the scorecard, we have new goals. And if you use EOS, you know that the goals on the scorecard are expectations, what you expect to happen. Obviously, expectations have changed, so we revised the scorecard. And there's 3 primary things we look at right now: cash, jobs in progress, and opportunities. That's kind of backward looking, current, and forward looking. We figure that's where we could zero in the best. Our leadership team meetings, we resorted to a group text for live communication, daily huddles to give us, information changes daily. So we have a quick daily huddle every day, and a weekly meeting. We keep that weekly meeting. And any major course corrections, wait for those weekly meetings where we have more time to really discuss the issues. And that IDS refers to identify, discuss, and solve. That's the process we use to really dedicate some time to solving issues. And that weekly communication. So if any of you do EOS, you have the quarterly state of the company, which is communication to the company after the leadership team has its quarterly meeting. And that state of the company, we just communicate to employees where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And we find that where things are changing very much and very quickly now, it's better to do that weekly after we have our weekly leadership meeting. You go to the next page. Yeah, and that's it. So that's the summary. wanted to make that quick and concise and leave some time for Q&A. And we're doing Q&A at the end, right?
There we go. I was trying to stop the sharing. Yes, we'll do Q&A at the end. So again, if you have something you'd like to speak or add, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the Q&A panel. Just before we go on to Dan, let's just quickly take one question from Clay Harris. Clay is asking, Paul, how much of your scenario planning have you shared with the entire company?
Yeah, we've basically all of it. We actually share the entire vision traction organizer with the entire company. So they're really aware of our quarterly revenue targets, our quarterly profit targets. Actually, their bonuses, we do a type of profit sharing where they get paid based on gross margin, or gross profit. So we've shared all of that with them. We're letting them know that we're trying to keep staff on. Most of our employees are hourly, so if we have the work for them, they get the work. If they don't have the work, if we don't have the hours, they don't get the work. But my operations manager right now is making time to look at any training we can do to get them hours that way, because part of the PPP loan is, and the PPP grant is actually going to reimburse the salary of the people you keep. So we're sharing just about everything with them in those weekly addresses.
Awesome. Let's go on to Dan, who is muted right now. So make sure you unmute yourself. And Dan, why don't you talk a little bit about what Vaporware, the framework you've been using to evaluate companies?
Yeah, definitely. So, hey everyone, my name's Dan Moore. I'm the CEO of Vaporware. We are a software consultancy, so we build custom software to help business leaders solve challenges in all sorts of different areas. But one of our key services stems around automation and streamlining business processes. And so where we get pulled in for that is mainly around cutting costs, which a lot of people are doing right now. So we've put together a framework that's based on some much bigger consulting companies. Forrester in particular has a really nice initial framework that we've expanded on and narrowed down simply for cutting costs. To get started, we look at as many different business processes as we can inside of a company, but going back to what Paul was saying about cutting fat but not muscle or bone, we actually look at the core business. So if you're familiar with the 3 horizon model, any of your company initiatives that are on horizon 1 is where we're focused. So stuff that your business is incredibly used to and involved on a day-to-day basis with. And we're looking at making those muscles extremely lean and keeping them very specific to decrease those costs or the efforts required to get them done. Within each one of those processes, we look at a bunch of different factors. I mentioned the Forrester approach, and they have a rule of 5s is what they call it. And that's essentially, they look at the size of each and every single process and say, is the process well known or defined? Is it simple or is it centralized? And if you can say yes to all 3 of those things, then it's probably a good case for software automation or some kind of process automation. So the rule of 5s comes in where if it's pretty simple, then there's not a lot of decisions or corner cases that pop up in that process. For example, we worked with a pest control company recently in their field management services. And we looked for processes that they perform that have less than 5 decision trees in those processes. And if that process is simple enough, then it's really a good candidate for that automation. We then look at how many steps are there in the overall process, and where we found is that number is around 500. So if there's more than 500 steps to a process, and I mean every single specific step. So not, if you think of the process of how do you get to work in the morning, you're not just saying, well, I get dressed and I get in my car and I drive to work. You're talking about, okay, when do you accelerate your car on the way to work? When do you apply the brake on the way to work? So really detailed steps. And then we look at how centralized those processes are as well. So If they span more than 5 people, then it's probably a little bit too complex to look into automation right away. So how we get started and things that we've done just to experience share a little bit. We've automated our recent outreach. So we are a pretty small team, and we have core services and core functions that we do for lead generation. And so we've started adopting tools to automate what we know works or what we know did work. And that freed us up, and everyone on our team, so our salespeople in that case, that freed those people up to go and innovate and come up with new ideas that may hit the market or not. So their day-to-day jobs, which they used to perform manually, now have an automated tool that costs us a little bit more in terms of materials, but we found the solution and the outcome of that has allowed them to just free up their time. So just another quick example, and I have a deck here that I could send out afterwards as well. You don't have to jump into custom software to get started with this. So especially if you're dealing with tight deadlines and getting something out the door, I would suggest starting with really small pieces. So anytime you use spreadsheets or lists or email for communication, those are often good opportunities to look into. There are some good tools out there, Smartsheet, to automate spreadsheet work and pulling reports and looking at data. We really like Zapier. It's a low-level, think Siri shortcuts, but for APIs that allow you to create more scalable and maintainable automation processes without diving into all of the custom requirements of programming. And then there's a couple others, Pipify and Process Street are two really good programmable tools that are probably more familiar to either a process board and moving sticky notes on a whiteboard if you manage process still that way, or just capturing form data in a structured way that allows you to then take advantage of tools like Zapier. So that's part of the process that we've used recently and where we help out companies.
Hey Dan, before I know we're gonna do Q&A a little bit later, but just one of the attendees on the call is asking, how did you automate your outreach? So what does that mean when you say we automated our outreach?
Great question. So I mean top of line, top of funnel business outreach. So there are a couple of great tools out there that handle the entire sequencing of emails and initial meeting settings and call settings. So outreach.io is one that we've used recently. We're big fans of apollo.io that is having a COVID-19 startup qualifier, but they're very vague in what that means, that allow you to go out and prospect businesses and keep track of when people change jobs on LinkedIn. And then personally, I still do a lot of outreach for our company. I use Dux Soup, D-U-X Soup, and it automates LinkedIn interactions. So as you've been probably spammed personally by people on LinkedIn, that's a tool that will do that for you, but I use it in a non-spammy way that takes advantage of some quote unquote growth hacks, which essentially allow you to view a lot of people's profiles based on their job title or some list that you've created, and they get notified that you've viewed their profile. And so there's metrics that you could track of view backs and stuff like that. So
that's awesome. So we'll put your deck at the end of this at eoraleigh.com/coronavirus. That's where we're going to put Paul's as well. These three tools, Outreach, Apollo, and Duck Soup, we'll add those to our virtual work at home document that's also on that URL. So there's tons of great links and software tools for people to use on that work at home doc, really in almost any category. So we'll add these three to there. Matthew, you have not scaled down, but you've helped a bunch of your clients, and this is do this, especially after the 2008 recession, because you are really old. Can you tell us about what do you do, or what is that? How can we as entrepreneurs what are our options? Are there things in our lease that we should be looking at? What do you recommend? How do we do this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everybody. Just a little bit of background on our company, Davis Moore. There's no one named Davis or Moore, first fun fact, but we're a commercial real estate services firm where we represent the occupier of space, typically those that lease office space. And if you look at any kind of corporate balance sheet, right behind labor and then technology is real estate. And in times like this, and also like in 2008, managing cash flow and looking at relief there is something on the top of mind for everybody, with a lot of our clients and with us ourselves. So this is obviously a very different situation than 2008, but there are certainly some similarities as well. I do have a white paper that I'll send to you, Matt, after this that we can add to that deck just as it relates to the coronavirus and some of the tools and processes in place. But the first recommendation that I would make is your landlord in these trying times is your friend usually. They're trying to manage cash flow as well. They have a mortgage to pay. They've got operating expenses as well. And so starting an early and open dialogue with them as early as possible is one of the first recommendations that we can make. Next is your attorney is your friend as well. Depending on the state and the way that the clause is written, communicable disease can potentially be considered as force majeure or an act of God. So have your attorney look at that provision as well and see what relief there may be. And again, I can't give advice to that because I'm not an attorney, but I'm familiar enough with it to be dangerous. And then also your property and casualty insurance section of your lease is an area to look at as well. We've been on phone calls a lot the last several weeks with a number of our clients asking about rent relief. How do they get a couple of months free? And I've seen solutions all over the board. Oftentimes, since the passing of the CARES Act and the PPP program, property owners are referring their tenants to that and citing relief there. There have been other times that in exchange for a short-term extension on the back end, based on the tenant's financial position, the landlord is offering free rent today. And that's one of the biggest things that I find similar to between now and 2008. In 2008, you had all these commercial mortgage-backed security loans that were all reaching maturity. And one of the best ways that the property owner can refinance their loan is to have stable lease term with viable credit tenants. And so if a company can prove financially long-term viability, we're just in a cash crunch today perhaps, or we just need some real-time relief today, there could be an angle for you to talk to your landlord about, let's say you're 2 years out from your lease expiration. It would actually be a win-win for both parties for you to add term on the back end now in exchange for a reduced rate and or free rent today. And so again, having that open dialogue with your property owner, with your landlord, and trying to create solutions that are win-win. And in this environment as well, we're going to see the same thing coming with these big corporate entities, these institutional owners having to refinance debt, especially if you look in the retail space where they've been hit hardest by the stay-at-home ordinances. We're going to see a lot of those notes coming to maturation, and there could be an opportunity there for you to receive economic benefit today in exchange for adding term tomorrow. So that is the short answer of this. And again, I've got a white paper that I'll send to you, Matt, afterwards, and would love to answer any questions around these items.
Perfect. Thank you, Matthew. That is awesome. So just to recount, it's the force majeure or what were the other clauses that you recommend we look at in our leases? Absolutely look at your leases and as terms relates to the force majeure provision, and then also your property and casualty insurance, and those sections, property, casualty, and your insurance provisions as well. Okay, cool. Thank you. And in regards to the attorney conversation, we had Tad Van Duzen from Williams Mullen, who's been a longtime EO supporter, on a webinar last week. And especially for those in the EO Raleigh-Durham chapter, if you need somebody to talk to, he is taking 30-minute consults essentially, and his information is at eoraleigh.com/coronavirus. So you can find that out there, and we'll post that white paper as well. So we are at the time for Q&A, and panelists, you can ask questions of each other, and certainly anyone on the call can either raise your hand and we will call on you and unmute you, and then you can ask your question directly, or type something into the Q&A. All right, Sherry, you asked, how do you handle not being able to help? I'm not sure who that is to. So can I see here? Sherry's from Raleigh, Durham. I'm wondering, Sherry, if you're at a place where I can unmute you. You are. I'm going to unmute you. And why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Hey guys, thanks for doing this. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. So part of it is, it's a very interesting question because I want to help as much as I can, almost to my own detriment. And what's happening is people are asking me, Matt, to your point, they're already asking me now, hey, can you waive our internet bill? Or can you do that? I'm like, guys, I can't make that decision right now. We don't even know the extent of this. And as an infrastructure company, like some of the companies that we've heard from, you have a very variable cost, right? It's, Paul, you mentioned, hey, if they're not working, you don't have to pay as much, so on and so forth. No matter what, we have, X amount of infrastructure that has to get paid. And on top of that, in a weird way, we're actually mandated not to slow down, shut down, do anything, right? I mean, you know what I mean? It's like trash service people can't not pick up stuff. It's like mandated. So what I'm getting is I'm getting lots of requests to help, but I'm not in a position to help. Can anyone share around that where it's like, we're just not there yet? I'm like, and I keep telling them, and then the response is like, oh my God, you said we're in this together. It's almost a joke because I'm like, well, I can't just give you, you have 10 hotels, that's $12,000 a month, of which 9,000 is cost. I'll help you with the 3, but I can't give you the 12. And there, everyone gets upset. So
Sharon, can you hear me? This is Paul.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here because, I've been asked, we have some restaurants at BlueHat that, they say, hey, some of them are completely closed. Some of them are trying to do the curbside service and they're asking for breaks too. But, the way I heard you describe your position, it is what I would think. I mean, what would happen if you said exactly that to them? I mean, you are in this together. You happen to be in the middle of it, right? And from some people, like I have one commercial property that I have tenants in, and they haven't asked for help yet, but I went to my bank and I'm waiting to hear whether I can get a delay there. And then I feel like I just want to tell them, if I get a delay, you can get a delay, right? It's the same thing I tell all my employees. I tell them, if I have cash, you can have cash. If I'm making money, you can make money, right? Especially with our bonus plan. And so that's kind of, if you're open and honest with them, you're playing monkey in the middle. You've got bills, they've got bills. If you can get a break, you can give them a break. But I think that open and honest approach would go a long way.
Yeah, and that's in our core values, and that's I think it's maybe a conflict with who I am sometimes to not be able to help. So it's been tough.
Right. I tell people if there's no margin, there can be no mission. I think that's a Stephen Covey thing. But you got to have margin to be able to deliver your mission.
Right.
Yeah, Sharon, it's interesting because you are what's legally deemed, I believe, an essential service. You are like I know, coming from the call center space, that call centers supporting internet companies are deemed essential because you can't stop the people signing up for internet and making changes to internet. So I can feel your pain, and wanting to help is really commendable. And I would imagine that the person paying $12,000 would very much appreciate the break to $9,000 for some period of time. And would also, as a business owner or manager, would understand that you're probably not in a position to do it all. But anything probably helps.
Yeah, and if anyone else is on the call that has established a way to handle that, I'd love to hear from them in the directories, or I don't know if it's whatever, it's Q&A from the panelists.
Yeah, and for everybody on the call, if you have something to add to this conversation, just raise your hand. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. It can be an experience share. So I'm just looking for some hands to jump up, and we'll bring you into this.
And
I have
go ahead.
one thing to add to that, Sharat, and this is not directly applicable to you having like legal obligations, but when I'm not able to help somebody, I point them in a direction that may help them as well, and that softens the blow of no. So just a communication aspect of, look, I do have your interests in mind. My hands are tied here, but maybe this other place, like if you start talking about real estate differently or these different government plans that are becoming available, that might help soften the blow at least.
That's a good point. I'll ask a general question for the panel, or Sharon, if you want to jump in too. Pedro from EO Costa Rica would like to know, is there an app or methodology that he can use to organize the load of the people based on sizing down the company? So to balance the workload on different departments and still head towards profits. Paul, this seems like kind of a softball for you. You should be, I would imagine you would have an answer to this.
Yeah, it's not an app, but it's just feedback. So, I mean, in every EOS quarterly, we review the accountability chart and we ask, of course, GWC, does the person get the job, want the job, have the capacity to do the job? And usually capacity is enough time to do the job well. And that's just a question we ask, you know, how are you doing? Do you have enough time to do your job well? And if you don't, we can get you resources like maybe being able to delegate, maybe hire someone to help you if you're growing. But that time capacity issue is something we just ask in real time. I've never heard of anyone having a software way to measure. But when I hear the word measurement, I think about scorecard. And I think about if that person, it should be evident on the scorecard if they are not able to do their job well, because they're not hitting the goals or the expectations that are on the scorecard. So that might be your first key or your first clue, is that if something's not hitting the goals on the scorecard, you might dig into it and ask why. Right, but I don't know, I've never heard of an automated way to do it. Sorry.
And Pedro, I just chatted you as well. It'd be helpful if we knew what type of business you were in. But Dan or Sharon, do you have any other suggestions for an app or a tool to balance the workload of different departments?
I don't personally. I'm sorry, Dan.
We use EOS as well as our kind of firm operating system. And I would agree with Paul that just having really good scorecards and holding people accountable to those is really the best tool for us. And really looking at it on a weekly basis.
So Pedro, interestingly enough, sells construction materials. So I would imagine, a lot of salespeople, but also an inventory or a operations thing. So maybe, Paul, is it okay if at the end of this we put your contact information on the website? And then Pedro, if you would like to speak with Paul about EOS and have a offline discussion, I would imagine you might be able to have some more discussion. Is that okay with you, Paul? I just volunteered you.
Yeah, sure. That's cool.
Okay. So, yeah. All right. And Pedro's saying he will reach out to you afterwards. Very good. Looking for some other questions. Dan, I saw a couple of questions just into how do you tell the fat from the muscle in the bone as you are looking at your company? Matthew, why don't we start with you on that one? I mean, you've when you look at Davis Moore, you think about what's happening in all of your different, I know you have different verticals that you're targeting. How do you tell who needs to stay and who might be lower down on the cut list? Yeah,
and I kind of go back to the previous topic of EOS and the scorecards. We're trying to interact as much as possible in this environment. We're having every other day an 8:30 standing Zoom where we get together, kind of talk about that day, what's happened the day before. And then we're also doing our weekly L10s every Monday, which is the level 10 meeting, which is about an hour and a half where we go through scorecards and then the key initiatives, which are rocks for the quarter, and going around those. And so those metrics really seem to kind of present themselves in terms of how things are operating or how things are going. You can tell fast. we're also kind of doing accountability partners where every day somebody in the firm is speaking to someone else just to check in and do not only a scorecard check or how did the day go check, but really a mental health check as well. Because I think that's a key thing in this environment. It's just how are people feeling? How are people doing? So the communication's the biggest thing. And then, you know, we're not at that point yet where we feel like we've got to cut any fat. But I think that over a 90-day review, I think we'll quickly know, just given the tools that we're using with EOS.
Yep.
Fat from the bone for me is we just went down all of our expenses, right? And I'm lucky my wife, I have the finance seat at BlueHat, and my wife is accounts payable and the invoicing. So, but on accounts payable, she's just looking at them one by one, and as they come in, she tees them up for us to ask, you know, is this a must-have or a nice-to-have, right? Because, you know, as we were doing well and as we were spending money to make things easier, it's almost like that automating through software, right? That's like delegating to software. And when you do the reverse accountability chart and you're doing the reverse of delegation, right? What of those things have just been nice to haves that we can do away with? So that's the first thing as far as fat goes.
You know, Paul, that actually reminds me of that is true. And once you do that, you have what I have to have, but sometimes you still don't have enough cash. And then, at least for my business, it gets into the what are they going to do category, which is an awful discussion to have, but sometimes necessary. So I'll give an example, and Matthew, tell me if you disagree, but you may choose to just not pay your rent to your landlord, whether they agree or not, and say, okay, they probably have a tolerance for 3 or 4 months, as long as then you pick it up again, and then you effectively have a low interest loan that was given to you, but just to make it work cash flow. I've only had to do that a couple times, but I've never had an issue where the landlord bolted the door. And maybe there's other vendors of yours. So if you can't get customers to pay faster, then who can you pay slower to preserve cash once you get to just at your core capabilities? But Matthew, is this an awful experience, Sharon? I'm giving bad advice. What have you seen with landlords?
So I think that it's kind of how you position that. Telling your landlord, hey, I may be late paying is a lot different than just going dark. And so it's just, if you're going to go that route, it's how do you go that path, right?
Right. It's not what you say. It's how you say it.
It's not what you say. It's how you say it, right?
Yeah. But sometimes when to all of the point, if you're not in business, then everything's a moot discussion and there's nothing to come after. So
Right.
I think it's all. Everybody understands that when you start talking to them and communicating, to your point, Matthew. Yeah, Paul.
Just one other thing with that. If you make a list, like to that point, if you want to make a list of vendors, right, you're going to have a list of vendors and probably they have different priorities, right? And probably each vendor has a different tolerance for not paying. I know I have some vendors that are like, I don't care, you still got to pay for it, right? And then I've got some vendors where I have a relationship. I've seen a client, and I think this is a great idea. Maybe just up front, you know, you're asking for vendors for some terms, right? Some extended terms, and say, hey, you know, everybody knows this is an issue. How about blanket? You offer us longer terms. So if you make a list of vendors, maybe you can prioritize them according to the relationship and their tolerance level for not paying or slow paying.
Yeah. Someone anonymously just asked, what are your thoughts on being proactive with your offers to clients? Do you wait for them to come to you and ask? So I think this person is asking for discount purposes. So do you wait for them to say, hey, can I have a discount? Or do you offer the discount ahead of time as a way of staving off them canceling?
We're waiting, I can say. Squeaky wheel.
You're waiting.
Yep.
Sharon, what about you? Are you waiting for people to come to you and ask for a discount, or are you offering proactively?
I think we're waiting because to everyone's point about that essential service, I'm going to play that card because that's the card we were dealt. So saying, hey, we are an essential service, please try to pay as long as possible. And when we see a light at the end of the tunnel, we kind of want to look backwards and say, how can we help you jump into to the future, and just we're trying to not offer it up front.
Yep. Dan, do you have this issue when you're doing custom software development? Do you have any clients that are saying, hey, I've got to slow down this project, I've got to put a hold on this project? And are you doing anything proactively?
Yeah, I would say that the majority of our business has been deemed fat in terms of trimming that. So for those existing clients, we are coming up with, trying to come up with creative ways that we don't typically do or handle, because we realize the severity of the situation and we still want to help them and offer them something. So basically our clients have come to us and said, look, I can't do this right now. Either we stop the project or we figure something else out. And so we're coming up with payment terms, different lower level retainers, like part of what we do in terms of automation, but this works for this case as well, is we've basically said, okay, what can we get away with? So we have really high quality standards, but to bring them down or to cut costs, what can we do and how do we communicate that efficiently and correctly? So is there a different approach or a quality or a speed hit that we can take, saying, yes, it'll cost half the price, but it'll take twice as long to do or get done or something like that. So often there's that pair two principle of 80-20, where we can cut down 80% of what they need or meet them halfway, but it's only hitting us or hurting us 20% of the time. So we look for opportunities like that and are trying to be creative, and we're able to position that for, this is only during this crisis. This is not a long-term thing. This is not something we're comfortable with, but when we have no other choice, it's what we have.
So just to summarize, what I've heard from all of you is that you're waiting for clients to come to you, and then you're trying to work with them. You're not proactively reaching out and offering a discount or a different program. Which makes sense.
To add to that, that's for active clients. Now, we went back to a lot of our past clients and past customers and said, hey, is there something else that we can help you with right now? Is there something that's auxiliary or related to our capabilities that we wouldn't typically offer, but we're willing to do because everyone's in this hurting position, kind of thing? So that's a very, again, it's not about diluting our marketing message, but like if there's some other machine that we can repair or some other thing that we can do that'll keep our people employed, like you mentioned, Paul, the residential word, like not going outside of the place where our employees are comfortable, but realizing that, hey, is there some other skill or capability that they have that they're able to do? In our world, that's programming languages. There's a ton of really bad programming languages out there that our guys hate working in. But if it's what needs to be done and people need those services right now, then we're willing to do that. So.
Yep, makes total sense. All right, we have time for just another question or two. If you have one, raise your hand or put it in the Q&A panel. I saw one, I just lost it. Let me see here. Actually, it looks like that has been answered, or they've removed it. Panelists, do you have any questions for each other? As long as we're here, we have another time.
All good.
No? All right. Well, again, thanks everybody for attending. We're coming up here in 45 minutes, which was our goal. There's a quick poll that is out there as a quick reminder. Again, thanks to Amy, Henning, our chapter manager, and Olivia from EO for making this happen. And everything from today will be at eoraleigh.com/coronavirus. You're also going to find links for our next 3 webinars at that site. And feel free to pass on those links to register to family members, chapter members, community members. We're just trying to share the information. And then I'm going to put my email and then the president of our chapter, Todd Atlas's email, in the chat panel right now. If you have any suggestions for future webinars, feel free to email us and we will try to get that content put together. Paul, Dan, Matthew. Oh, Todd just jumped on. Todd, do you have anything you'd like to add here at the end?
No, just appreciate you guys sharing your wisdom, and it was all very relatable to me, trying to figure out what our next steps are. So thank you all for sharing.
Happy to do it. Thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your afternoon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.